Lion in the Wind, Chapter 13. Mestra pulled to a stop at the front gate of the laboratory and rolled down his window. "Evening, Lieutenant. Going somewhere?" asked one of the guards. "Just going to town for a few minutes to visit a friend and then I'll be back." "All right, but don't be too long." "You only have a half hour until the gates close for the night," said the guard. "I know that. Thank you, Sergeant. I'll be back before then," replied Mestra. The guard took 2 steps back and waved him through as the main barricade opened. Mestra's car then quickly rolled through the gate and into the night. He continued to drive down the road for a ways until he could no longer see the lights of the laboratory behind him, but hadn't gone far enough to see the lights of the town in front of him just yet. Seeing that he was safe, he pulled off to the side of the road and waited. A few minutes later, a man in full-body camouflage slipped out of the darkness and up to his car. Mestra rolled down the window and handed him a small package. "Everything's in there. I suggest you get this back to your superiors as quickly as you can. The Yigzin are developing a number of weapons that will be of great concern to the leadership. If these projects succeed, the Gorg are doomed." The man bowed slightly. "I will carry these with great haste," he hissed. "See that you do," said Mestra as he rolled up his window. The man then melted into the darkness again as Mestra drove away. "So, heading back to the rear already?" asked Pentel. "Yeah, our Lion needs servicing, and I need to pick up a couple new squad members to replace the ones I lost," said Welk. "I'm sorry to hear that. We lost a few ourselves. Those men were like brothers to me," said Pentel. Welk sighed. "Yeah, same here. But I know what we did today saved a lot of lives." "And your Lion saved ours," smiled Pentel. "Indeed he did. So, are we going to see you around the battlefield again anytime soon?" Welk shrugged. "I would think so. Although, we first need to get our Lion fixed, and there's no telling how long that'll take. I hope no more than a couple weeks at most." Pentel smiled. "Well then, we'll hopefully see you sometime after that." "Yeah, we'll see." They both then turned as they heard truck doors close and a vehicle start up. "Well, that's my ride. See you around, sir. It's been a pleasure serving with you," said Welk. The lieutenant nodded. "Same here." Welk then climbed into the back of the truck, closed the gate, and quickly sat down as the truck began to pull away. He turned and looked at Tegani as they merged onto a main road and began to gain speed. As he did, he noticed a look of concern on the Lion's face. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "I feel like I've failed everyone," replied Tegani. "How so?" asked Welk. "We've only been in combat 1 day and I'm already in need of repairs. Now I will likely be away from the action for several weeks, a period of time in which many good soldiers will die needlessly because I was not there to save them. Don't let it bother you. You've already saved countless lives, and even gave the Gorg a bloody nose. That's quite a lot for your first day. So you should be proud of yourself." Tegani turned to his left and watched as rows upon rows of trees raced past them in the rapidly fading twilight like battalions of shadowy green sentinels. He turned back to Welk and said, "May I ask you a personal question?" "Sure, what is it?" "I am confused about something. Today, during our time with Lieutenant Pentel, one of his men asked me to kill him." Welk looked surprised at this. "Who?" Tegani shook his head. "I don't know his name." "Well, did you?" Tegani shook his head again. "No, the Yigzin are my people. It is my duty to protect them. As such I would never willfully harm one of them, either through my actions or my inaction. Yet one of them requested of me that I end his life. He talked as though there was no hope of saving him, and that I should speed his death in order to protect the others. I couldn't do it. Even so, I find myself conflicted. My killing him would have shortened his suffering, providing mercy to a man in great pain. And yet, he was Yigzin, and thus I could not harm him," he said. Welk gently grabbed Tegani's chin and looked him straight in the eye. "You made the right choice. All of us feel helpless at times. But killing someone like that is wrong, even if he's gonna die anyways. I know it seemed right to him, but he was wounded and not in his right mind. In cases like that we have to step up and make the right choices for them whenever they are unable to do so it themselves. Tegani nodded. I understand. He then turned his eyes toward the horizon and thought about the events of the day as flashes of artillery fire flickered in the distance. A large, somewhat plump Gorg officer looked up as a tall, thin man with a weasel-like face walked into the office and held out a package to him. Here is the information you requested from our spy, he hissed. The officer took the package from the man's hand, and studied it briefly before looking at him in unrestrained disgust. Leave, he grunted. The weasel-faced man gave a twisted, giddy laugh and then hustled out the door. The officer snorted disdainfully at this. Mitizen are such disgusting creatures. If they weren't so useful, I'd have seen them wiped out years ago, he muttered. He then opened the package, and glanced at the documents inside. Interesting, he said quietly. He soon tucked the files back into the envelope and then walked to the office of the Marshal General. Inside there he found several older, gray-haired officers who were arguing over the abysmal progress of the war. The officer grunted and scowled as he noticed another Mitizen agent sitting pompously in a nearby chair as he grinned with twisted glee. The agent took note of the officer's large, troll-like features and snorted in disgust. The officer flexed his thick, bulging arm muscles and scowled at him in return. The Mitizen grinned condescendingly. The officer then cleared his throat, catching the attention of the Marshal General, who immediately waved for the others to be silent. What do you have for me? He asked. The officer stepped forward and placed the envelope on the desk. Information from one of our spies. I think you will find its contents interesting, he said. The Marshal General picked up the envelope, pulled out the papers and studied them. When he reached the 5th page his eyes went wide. So, the rumors are true. The vile Yigsen have constructed a mechanical monstrosity that can defeat our men. He slapped the papers on his desk in disgust. I want this creature, its creator, and all evidence of its existence wiped from the face of this planet, he shouted. The Mitizen agent sat up and held out his hand towards the Marshal General. May I see that page? He hissed. The Marshal General eyed him suspiciously. Please, General, we are in this war together. Do not hold animosity to one who seeks to aid you to victory. The Marshal General hesitated slightly as the Mitizen agent grinned acrimoniously. Finally, he handed the page to the agent who read it, and then grinned with devilish delight. Interesting. Most interesting indeed, he said greedily. It's an abomination and it must be destroyed, said the Marshal General. Ah, but with that you would be wrong. The Marshal General's eyes narrowed. How so? If we can capture this robot, and its creator, we can force them to work for us. With such a weapon at our disposal, we could not only destroy the Yigsen, but also eliminate those wretched Satizen as well. In doing so, we would rid the world of all our enemies. And what if they don't agree to work for us? Asked the Field Marshal. Then we simply destroy them. Either way, we win, General. Humph, grunted the Marshal General as he thought about the proposal. Finally, he looked up at one of his officers, and said, collect a force of your best men. I want that robot and its creator captured and brought to me. The officer saluted, and said, it will be done as you've requested. Tegani sat near the back of the passenger train car and thought over the day's events. Welk looked over at him as he sat straight and rigid, his eyes seeming to stare off into nothingness. Something on your mind? He asked. I am reviewing my actions from today in order to ensure that I do not suffer such damage again, or fail in my mission as I have. Welk rubbed Tegani's shoulders, and said, don't be so hard on yourself. I don't think anything could have prepared you for what we went through the other day. I knew the deck was stacked against us, but I didn't expect things to go quite that badly. Tegani shook his head. Logic would state that, while our actions were brave, our situation was not tactically advantageous. It may have been better if we'd tried a strategy or course of action that was different from the one we undertook. Welk grunted. That's the problem. I don't think we would have found any better opportunities, regardless of how long we looked. However, if you have any suggestions in the future on how we could do things better, I'm all ears. Tegani nodded. I will endeavor to offer such advice to you whenever it is needed. Just then the train lurched forward slightly. We're slowing, said Tegani. Welk sat up and looked out his window. We may be coming into our station, but I can't be for sure, he replied. Just as he said this, the lights in the cabin came on. Several of the men groaned and covered their eyes. Great lords of Varric. Warn a guy when you're gonna do that, grunted one of the men. Sorry about that, sir, but we're coming into your station, and the conductor wanted me to wake you, said an attendant who stood at the front of the car. Well, it still wouldn't hurt to at least warn us next time. Welk stood up and said, All right, that's enough, gentlemen. On your feet. The men all groaned in dismay at this order. Come on, move, said Welk more insistently. The soldiers grudgingly stood to their feet, collected their gear, and then stood in line as the train pulled to a stop. It was dark outside, as most of the lights in the town had been switched off for the night. The soldiers climbed out of the car and stopped briefly on the platform to let their eyes grow accustomed to the darkness as the train pulled away behind them. I see we've returned to a warm welcome as always, quipped Sims. Looks more like the cold shoulder to me, said a soldier. Well, that's nothing new. It wouldn't be the first time we've been left in the dark. No pun intended, of course, said a second with a grin. All right, gentlemen, let's get moving. We've got a long walk ahead of us, said Welk. They then walked quietly through the town and near total darkness and soon found themselves on the narrow service road that led to the laboratory. The men said nothing to each other as they walked, and cautiously listened to the sounds around them for signs of possible enemy activity in the area. Even though they were far behind the front lines, war had already made them edgy. As such, walking in near total darkness did nothing to help ease their nerves. However, the walk went quickly, despite everyone's nervousness, and they soon reached the last hill before the laboratory. But as soon as they crested the top of it, Tegani spied something near the gate that immediately put him on the defensive. He crouched down and whispered anxiously, Stop, stop. What's the matter? Asked Welk. Something's wrong, take cover. What's happening? Is he malfunctioning or something? Asked one of the soldiers. Just get down, whispered Welk. He then took up a prone position on the ground and pulled out his binoculars. As he did, Tegani switched his eyes from night vision to a three-way scanning mode and began sweeping the area for signs of activity. What's happening down there? I don't see anything, said Welk. That's the problem. There's no guards or anybody watching the facility. Major Delgro would never allow something like that to happen, whispered Tegani. Welk carefully scanned the gateway and the guardhouse. To his surprise, Tegani was right. The place looked abandoned. He swore. Great. It looks like the facility may have been compromised, he muttered. By who? Asked Sims. Who else? Sims blinked in surprise. You're not seriously suggesting that this was done by the Gorg, are you? It's the only thing I can think of. They're not that smart, protested Sims. They must be, or else who could have done this? But Sims didn't have an answer to that. They all then continued to scan the facility. Tegani, do you see anything? Asked Welk. Nothing, there are no patrols or thermal signatures anywhere in the area. However, I do see evidence that this may have indeed been perpetrated by the Gorg, replied the Lion. But how could they get here so fast? Asked Sims. Given how thin our lines are, it wouldn't take much for them to sneak a chopper or two through our skies and fly them all the way out here without being detected, said Welk. I don't think that's how they got here. I see 4 large cargo trucks just inside the main gate. It's possible that they were smuggled in, replied Tegani. Again Welk swore. Great, and now we've got traitors in our midst, he muttered. Just then Tegani stood up and began moving forward. Wait, where are you going? Asked Welk. Tegani paused. To scout the perimeter fence in the facility. Take one of the men with you, replied Welk. Tegani shook his head. I can move faster, and with greater stealth if I go alone. Having someone with me would only slow me down and put them in unnecessary danger. Welk paused briefly as he thought about this. All right, but be careful, said Welk. Tegani nodded. I will. He then vanished into the night, moving in near total silence as his body blended perfectly into the soft flowing shadows that surrounded the facility. He stopped just 100 feet from the main gate and studied it. He could see a pair of boots and a hand protruding from the door of one of the two guardhouses. He scanned further and found two Gorg shock troopers hiding discreetly behind a nearby barrier. This intrigued him, as he hadn't detected them earlier. He soon spotted more Gorg shock troops moving back and forth through the darkness just inside the fence. Yet they didn't appear on his thermal sensors. So either they were using some form of thermal masking, or he was more damaged than he realized. We have a problem, he said over the radio. How bad is it? Asked Welk. Bad. I'm going to scout some more and see if there's a way in, said Tegani. He then began moving around the perimeter fence, searching for a possible way to enter the laboratory grounds undetected as he did. He soon found what he was looking for. Sergeant Welk, bring the men to my position. We'll go in from here. Where are you? Outer fence, 200 meters to the left of the main gate. Acknowledged, we'll be right there. Tegani then settled down and continued to watch the laboratory for several minutes as he listened for the approach of his squad members. The squad soon arrived and stopped behind him as Welk and Sims knelt down by his side and studied the area in front of them. So what do we do first? Asked Sims. We enter the facility and secure the immediate area, whispered Welk. Well, obviously. I mean, how do we do that without being detected? Leave that to me, whispered Tegani. The two men then watched as Tegani quickly vanished into the grass and then reappeared near the fence. With careful skill he used his claws to slice open a hole in the fence and slipped through it. Several moments later the words, "All clear," came over the radio. Welk's men then slipped through the hole in the fence and soon met up with the Lion near one of the barracks buildings. As soon as they arrived, Tegani nodded towards a nearby structure. That building is being guarded by 9 Gorg soldiers. I'll slip through the back door and take down the ones inside. You get the 4 out front. Wait until you hear me start my attack before you begin yours. I don't want to risk them shooting any of the soldiers inside. Why are we freeing them? Shouldn't we take out those other Gorg first? Whispered Welk. We need the extra support. As you remember, there are only a few of us, and we are likely facing a full company of Gorg, said Tegani. Ah, good point. Tegani then turned and vanished into the darkness. Welk waited several tense minutes until he heard a roar and the sounds of shots being fired from inside the barracks. The 4 guards out front turned to see what was happening. Seeing his opportunity, Welk shouted, "Now!" He then leapt up from his hiding place and fired at the 4 soldiers. Several other soldiers joined him, and within seconds all of the Gorg were dead. Move, go, 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 said Welk as he signaled for his men to follow him. They all then flowed out of the darkness and towards the barracks just as Tegani appeared through the front door of the building. The men are on the ground floor near the back. They're shaken but okay. Get them armed and ready for action. I'm going to move deeper into the facility and see what the Gorg are after. Welk tried to protest but, before he could, Tegani bolted off into the darkness. Welk cursed. He then turned to Sims, and said, "Let's get these men dressed, armed and ready. He's gonna need backup." "Are you just going to let him run off like that?" asked Sims. "Tegani can take care of himself. Right now we need to concentrate on taking back this facility," said Welk.